All right, everybody. Good morning. We got an excellent guest speaker today, Dr. Elise Demeter, and she's going to be talking about, excuse me, how to communicate your research. So I'm going to turn it over to you, my friend. It is all yours. These are some great research scholars for the spring semester.
Well, thank you, Patrick. I'm glad you were able to come in and rescue us here. Appreciate that. I was stuck outside the meeting like everybody else, folks. So I've been emailing, hey, let me in. But we are here. Welcome. Happy Wednesday. I'm glad to see you all here on Zoom. We're going to be talking about how to communicate your research today. I really enjoy giving this talk in this particular session. I also give similar talks for our graduate students, and I've been working on how we can offer more research and science communication events and resources at UNC Charlotte, because I think there's really a need for that here. So first, I'm going to just get started with some introductions. So I am Dr. Elise Demeter. I work in our Office of Assessment and Accreditation. I'm the Director of Academic Research and Assessment. So what that means is I run large-scale research projects out of my office here in Student Affairs. Some of those are to make your lives better as undergraduate students. So how can we ensure that you're learning what we want you to learn in your programs of study and getting through the door successfully and getting your diploma in your hand. Some of my work is also at the graduate level. So I work with a graduate school on some things related to research ethics and the ideas of authorship. So when you advance in your research careers, you may have the opportunity to present at a conference or to publish what your research study, and then who is an author and what order do we put authors in becomes a really relevant conversation. So I've been working with graduate students and graduate faculty specifically around those topics. I'm a cognitive neuroscientist by training, so I like working with people in our research areas because I, as a scientist, find it really fun to talk to people working in other disciplines and hearing about what you all do. So if you could, for me in the chat, if you could introduce yourselves, just your first name, your program, so I have an idea about who's the audience here, and just like a basics on your research topic, just the big area that you're researching in.
When you say, when you says program, are you talking about like major?
Yep, major's fine.
Okay, thank you.
Hi, Catherine. I was a biology major as an undergrad, so happy to have you here. All right. Biochemistry. Jackie, sociology and psychology, like that. All right. Measuring the emotional experience. Okay, cool. Lots of different areas here.
Got some fancy students doing some cool research.
It's always fun to see, right?
Much smarter than I am, that's for sure.
All right, we have some humanities as well. Hello, Blair. Glad to see you from the history major represented. I tend to talk about science examples a lot because I'm drawing on my own background as a person who works in the areas of biology and psychology and neuroscience, but please note everything I say today generalizes to those of you working in humanities areas. Good communication skills are good communication skills, really regardless of what field you're in. But because I think sometimes scientists have particular challenges in communicating well, especially to public audiences, I draw a lot of examples from those fields in particular. All right, you can keep rolling those in for me. We'll move forward. So I do want to remind you all, and if Patrick, you have anything to say on this, you're welcome to. I know you guys have your big OUR conference coming up later in April, and that registration is due this week by Friday at 5 p.m. That did need faculty approval, I think, to go in. So if you haven't done it yet, time to get it done. And it looked like this was the same as it's been in past years. I hope, Patrick, please correct me if I'm wrong. It looked like you'd either have the option of a poster, in which case you make a physical poster and you give like a 2 to 3 minute presentation walkthrough of your poster as people come by, and that you were also doing oral talks. And those would be maybe about 12 minutes with slides, as well as some time to answer questions from the audience. Does that all look good to you, Patrick?
I think that's about right. Yeah, just keep going to that website to check about any kind of updates or any kind of changes. Yeah, thank you.
Okay. So this will be really timely then. If you're still on that fence about wanting to register and thinking, can I pull this off? Can I do this? Or if you've already signed up and you're registered and you're committed, we're going to talk a little bit about specific ways you can apply the strategies I'm talking about today to posters and to the oral talk presentations. So highly relevant for you guys. So I always like to share that a best practice when you're talking about communicating your research is to start with the why. Why should we be talking about communicating your research? We're going to practice that today. So I think communicating to non-expert audiences is very important. We have the opportunity as researchers to help influence public policy and to help shape public discourse around the areas that we work in. It's important to be able to communicate well, to give effective presentations, and that includes at the OUR conference coming up in April. And I also think there's a lot of benefit for you all in terms of learning good communication skills, learning to talk about this great research that you're doing here on campus, and being able to communicate that to different audiences in settings like job interviews, for example. It can really set you apart on the job market to have this research experience. But when you're in an interview setting, the people you're talking to are not going to be experts in this niche area you've been working in. So you have to know, how do I communicate this in a way that other people are going to be like, oh yeah, that's really cool. And I understand now, like, the translatable skills you got out of that would be relevant to the job that you're applying for. So good communication skills can help you in all of these capacities. Oftentimes as academics, we are taught a very particular style of communication. We're taught to think about the background of our study, all of the literature that's come before us. If you've ever done a review of the primary literature in your field, you know that people really dig into that. They think that certain papers are very important to know about, and certain things are very important to cite. And we really have to understand the arguments of other people who have come before us in this line of work in order to be able to build upon them. However, then we get into, this is the area we're studying and why it matters, and these are my results, and these are my conclusions. However, the public really engages with research quite differently. The public wants to know right away, what's the bottom take-home message from the work that you're doing? So what? Why does it matter to me and my life? And then after that, if you've hooked them in, then they want to know about the supporting details of your work, your methods, the details of your results, the nuances of your conclusions. They don't want to get into that until you've kind of drawn them in with, how is this interesting and applicable to me first? So we have to really kind of flip the script when we're talking to non-expert audiences. And a good practice whenever you are giving a talk is to think really clearly and deeply about who your audience is. So that could be conference attendees, you could be talking to journalists in a public policy setting, popular press readers, maybe you're putting a blog out, for example, and you're putting something out on the web. You could also just be talking to, your parents. This is the work that you're doing, explaining it to your mom and dad when you go home for spring break. How would you explain it to them? How do you explain it to your roommate who's from a different area than you are? So it's really important to think about that audience and who they are. And I'll note here that when you are giving a talk or a poster presentation at a conference that represents a lot of different disciplines, it's always really important to think about that my audience is going to be other academics, but not necessarily people from my exact field. You'll have people from other majors, other departments come by or who are in your talk audience. And so whenever I'm in the audience for any of our events, one of the first things I'm thinking about is, okay, what's this student's major? What area are they working in? Is this a biology talk? Is it a history talk? Is this an education talk? So it's important to just sort of set up that context first for people, because they're trying to figure out in this big landscape of the university, where do you fit in? So knowing that you have a general audience, it's important then to position yourself for people right off the bat. And once you've thought about who your audience is, you can then think about how you shape and alter the message to fit that audience and their particular needs and interests. So I love this figure. It's thinking about your message, like your research study is your research study. We're not changing what that is fundamentally, but you can think about refracting that through a prism, or based on who your audience is, maybe you frame the motivation for your research a little differently. Maybe you highlight or prioritize different pieces of information. So for example, if you were talking to a nonprofit that you were hoping to be involved with, they want to know how your research fits with their mission, with their agenda. How do you speak to their mission? And that allows them to know that you might be a good fit as a partner for them. If you're talking to the media, they want to know, is your research newsworthy? Is this going to generate, clicks on our website? Is this like timely in some way? Does it relate to something that's going on in current events really well? And if you're talking about just like concerned citizens, you could also think about this as your neighbors, your audience in general, your parents, your friends. We want to think about things like, how does this affect my health or my safety? How does this affect my livelihood? How does this affect the environment or the city that I live in? Like, how does it matter to me as a person going through everyday life? So you might think about how you change and frame your message differently depending on who that audience is. I think, I've heard it said that we live in a post-truth world where facts are debated more than ever before. And people care more about the emotions and how they feel about something than whether something is factually accurate or not. And when we are in this kind of sphere, we have to think extra critically about how we connect in with our audiences and how we resonate in emotionally and personally with things that matter to our audience. Just giving a barrage of facts at people, just more and more and more information, you're never going to make that connection. You're never going to bridge that gap and pull your audience in with just information alone. You have to learn how to make it authentic and meaningful and something that people are going to genuinely care about. And I think you see an example of this when we think about climate change. For decades, scientists talked about this as global warming. That was the buzzword that you heard. The Earth is getting warmer, our atmosphere is getting warmer. These are the consequences happening. And by and large, the public around the world, and including in the US, just said, we don't care. I don't understand how this affects me at all. I don't care. So we do nothing about it. And then if you notice, we've now rebranded a lot of this language to think about it not as just global warming, but now we talk about it in the context of climate change. And you'll hear these ideas now connected to things like the very unseasonably warm weather we're having this week. We'll hear it connected to things like the severity of storms, the severity of hurricanes that we see every year. Well, when we start putting it in that kind of language, we can start making it personally relevant to people's lives right now, every day. We live in a state where beachfront properties matter. We care about our beach properties, and that's important for our tourism industry in our state of North Carolina. So if we are facing more severe hurricane seasons and more likelihood of really catastrophic damage occurring from these storms, that is impacting us now, and it matters in a dollars and cents way that has meaning and relevance for a whole variety of stakeholders. And so people will listen to that conversation in a way that they may not have to the atmosphere is warming up type of talk. So today we're going to talk about how you can level up your own communication practices when you're talking about these awesome research ideas that you put into the chat for me. And to do that, I'm going to introduce the idea of an elevator pitch. Have you guys heard about an elevator pitch before? You can tell me yes or no in the chat here. All right, I see some yeses. That's good. You'll like what you have to hear today. You can translate that in. Patrick, I hope you've heard about an elevator pitch before from your role. But for those of you who have not, it's a way to verbally communicate an idea, usually in about 3 minutes or less. So it's like literally the idea that you could jump in an elevator with somebody and say, oh, hey, Patrick, I have this great idea for a seminar for next year. And let me like pitch it to you and what it's going to be. And then the time that it takes us to ride that elevator up to an upper floor, I can tell you what my idea is, why it matters to you, and what's going to be cool about it. And you walk out wanting to know more. You ideally walk out of that situation with questions, a follow-up. You know what? It sounds like we should meet for lunch. It sounds like I want to hear more about this idea. Let's get some time on the calendar. So it's very important that in this situation, we're really distilling and honing our message. You want to leave your audience curious. You want to leave them with questions, with wanting to know more. You're not trying to cram every detail in. So when you give a poster presentation, you're giving an elevator pitch about your work. Sometimes you'll hear this called a spiel about posters, like, hi, can you give me your poster spiel? Can you walk me through your poster? People will say things like that. Hi, can you walk me through your poster? And they want you to give them the 2-minute version, to go through your poster in a succinct, smooth way that gives them the highlights, gives them the key kind of takeaway messages. They can ask you follow-up questions if they want to, or they can just say, hey, that's really cool, and move on. So this is an elevator pitch. And when you give a 12-minute talk, you can think about that like an extended version of an elevator pitch. 12 minutes is not that long. You still are going to have to prioritize information for that kind of format. So how do you do this, and how do you do this in the context of communicating your research? So first, we have to think about who our audience is. Then we want to frame our talk to think about what our audience values are and how we can connect in with those values. So think a lot about why would this matter to somebody, and framing your message in that kind of context. Then we need to prioritize our information. The big take-home points, the highlights. People don't care about all the nitty-gritty detail in these kinds of formats, but they do want to know, why is this relevant to me? And then even if you're giving a verbal talk or you're presenting in person live, you're going to want to write out your pitch. That allows you to really make sure that you're going to communicate what you need to and efficiently, and that you'll be able to kind of think about your word choice, think about the ways you're talking about your work. You can practice saying it, you can get feedback. You want to kind of do that again and again, regardless of what you're doing. But writing it out really helps you deliver a better in-person verbal presentation. So you've seen this a bit on my slides already, this concept of the so what. We've talked about the audience values here. So I'm going to use this expression, so what, to kind of say, all right, so what? Why should I care about your research? If I'm in your audience, why should I give you my attention? Why should I care about what it is you're presenting, as opposed to, just pulling out my phone and checking something on my phone? That might be more interesting to me. So I need to know, why is your work important for me in my life? Why are you here talking about it? Communicating your own excitement and enthusiasm is great, but you also want to think about why this might matter for whoever it is that happens to be in your audience. So academics at Know You Are conference, we care about research. We like to see successful students presenting the really smart things that they're doing. That will go really far. But we also want to know, how does this connect into some problem that's relevant for the real world? And that might be important or directly something that I care about. So if you can get that connection in, you really bought your audience's time and attention. So a potential barrier when we're communicating to others is what psychologists would call the curse of knowledge. All right, so in the chat, you tell me if you have ever had a professor here at UNC Charlotte who was clearly an expert in their field, clearly knew their area of research, their area of study, but maybe had a really hard time communicating that to you as students new to that discipline, new to that area of study, new to that major. Put it in the chat, yes or no, if you've ever had that kind of experience. You're like, I can tell you're a smart person, but I'm not understanding. I'm not connecting the dots. Ethan here says, yes, most definitely. All right, probably your professor was suffering from the curse of knowledge. What this means is when you become an expert in something, it could be anything. When you become an expert in that, you literally forget what it was like to be a beginner or a novice in that area. And so you forget the dots that you had to connect, the points that you had to put together, the things that you struggled with, what concepts were hard, what aha moments you had along the way that were really important for your final understanding. You kind of jump right to the end and assume that everybody else is there with you. But of course, beginners and novices aren't there with you, right? We have to build that bridge for them. We have to connect the dots. So you all as early career researchers and as undergraduates here have a distinct advantage when it comes to communicating your research. Because you are closer to that beginning stage, you have a better memory of what it's like to be a beginner. You remember what terms were difficult, what concepts were hard, what things did you not know before you got into this line of research that other people likely also don't know. So you actually have a leg up when it comes to explaining your audience, explaining your research to more general audiences, because you can help connect those dots and explain what needs to be explained in ways that will make sense to other people who are also new to these areas and these ideas. And so it's always a good practice when you're communicating your research to never just jump into the deep end with your audience. Just don't fly in, okay? People don't want to get all the nitty-gritty details about your work and the little details and all the jargon and all the words right off the bat. It's going to leave your audience just feeling completely lost. Instead, you want to start with the big picture context. Give them an orientation to the general areas that you're working on, the big problems and issues that are relevant to your research. Why do we care about this? And then you'll walk them into the details. A really good way for explaining those new ideas and those new concepts or the terms that are relevant for your research is to think about metaphors and analogies that would be really relevant for explaining those new concepts. So if you can draw a comparison between some new idea or some aspect of your research and something already familiar to your audience, that's a really good teaching tool. So I'm going to use the biology example here. If I wanted to tell you about parts of a cell, I could use the metaphor, for example, that the mitochondria are like, the cell is like a city, and that mitochondria are like the city's power plant. So already off the bat, you know what a power plant is. They produce energy. So now you're like, okay, mitochondria have something to do with producing energy. Producing energy, being the power plant for a city, is a really important thing. It helps run all the other parts of the city. If the power's not on, bad things happen, right? We know this. So you're already kind of understanding mitochondria are really important. And if they weren't functioning right, probably nothing else in the cell would be functioning right either. So without even getting into the details of really what mitochondria are, you already have a good conception of what their function is through that analogy. So as you're communicating, best practices here would be to be very explicit. Always say the basics. I'm working in history. I am studying this. Always say these basics explicitly. Oftentimes, people who are new to research think that if they use a lot of the terms and acronyms and jargon from your field, that it makes you sound smarter. It's like you're in the in crowd because you can speak the language. It's actually the opposite is true. Using too much jargon puts distance between you and your audience. And it makes you it harder for the audience to know that you understand what you're talking about. And they certainly don't understand what you're talking about. So go ahead and put in the chat for me some pieces of jargon that are relevant to your research, some of the vocabulary, some terms where unless you're really like a researcher in this niche area, it's maybe unlikely that you know what that word means. So what's some jargon that you all have learned from your research? EPA ratings. We have an acronym there. RPCA. Yep, I have no idea what that means. Oh, Catherine has a lot for me. Autolift. I don't know what that is. Claire has plasmids. Certainly lots more acronyms here. Jackie has affect control theory. Jackie, literally nobody else knows what affect control theory is. Nobody knows what that means. Jay has machine learning and deep learning. That's something where people will think they know, but they really don't. Good terms. So when we talk about these ideas, you'll want to find ways to explain these that would make sense to a beginner. So you really have to introduce these concepts and lay them out in really basic, simple terms. Otherwise, if you just kind of jump in, I'm using affect control theory to study this, you've already lost me because I don't know what that means. Second tip, if you're using numbers and statistics, and that's always a good idea in presentations to introduce some quantitative measures, but I like to round numbers. So particularly us as scientists, we like our precision. But when you're presenting your work, you need to round numbers. So when I talk about my UNC Charlotte research, for example, I never say we have 29,649 students at UNC Charlotte. I say instead, UNC Charlotte is 30,000 students strong and growing, right? Round the number. The higher level talk you're giving, the more round you need to make those numbers. It's also helpful to compare things to something people might have an idea of. So if you were working on nanoparticles, for example, you might talk about how many particles could fit on the tip of a pencil. And that's something that people understand how big that is, so they can relate to something very, very small that you're maybe talking about. So find a way to connect it to something that they already know. Particularly if you're giving a poster, but you probably show this in your talks as well. I'm going to bet you're going to have some type of graph or data visualization. You can put in the chat for me if you've had practice making graphs in your work, or if this would be something new to you in an area you might need to think about and get feedback on. So put that in the chat for me if you've been doing data visualizations or if that's a new area for you. I really like this resource. Stephanie Evergreen has this company called Evergreen Data. She puts out great YouTube videos and other content on her social media platforms about how to do good data visualizations to communicate your work. And she has this idea of this 3-2-1 principle. You have 3 seconds to grab your audience's attention on a given slide, on a given graphic. So simple is really good. Your visualization has 2 parts, the title and the graph. You want to make that title tell your story. A bold statement is really good for your audience to help them understand what's the point of this graph, what do I need to get from it. There's also likely one best type of graph or visualization that would tell your story in a very easy to understand and simple way. So think about the format that you're conveying things in as well. So there's a YouTube videos on this. It's long, so I don't have time to show it here, but it's worth just Googling this and looking up on this. I did take a couple of screenshots out of that video. So this is like a live animation video. It's really nicely done. So that idea about your 2 parts, that you have the graph and the title. This idea was they're showing this example of cat food sales, annual cat food sales, very generic title. And we're graphing what those annual cat food sales were in dots from 2017, 2018, 2019, hands covering here, but this is 2020. We see there's this big increase here. A lot of people think the data should speak for themselves. It should not actually speak for itself. You should speak for your data. And so instead, a best practice would be to make a really bold statement with your titles. So here, that bold statement, change the title to cat food sales leap in pandemic. So you already get that take-home message right away from the top of the graph from the title. And then you look at the data to see like, yep, that matches what I've been told. And this right away helps capture your audience attention because they're thinking, is this relevant to me? What's it talking about? Why do I care? What's the point? You're telling them what the point is right off the bat. So strong titles are really good. So how do you go about taking this elevator pitch concept, which you guys say you're familiar with, and applying it to the OUR conference presentations? What does that look like? So same kind of structure and ideas here. So if you're thinking about how do I walk somebody through my poster, how do I introduce myself during a talk, you're going to start with your introduction. You're going to talk about the big picture context of your research. Give me what area you're working in, the big field. I am a history major studying this general topic. Go big. And you want to include there what I've called that so what. So what does this matter to you? How is this relevant to something you might care about? Introduce that right away off the bat. That's how you'll hook people in. Then secondly, you'll want to explain your specific research goals. What was the specific point of your study and the methods that you use to achieve it? You'll talk your audience through your results. And this is where you're going to use figures. You're going to use pictures. You're going to make graphs of your data, for example, and use those to talk about your results. And again, tell the audience the take-home message. Don't make them figure it out from their graph, but you tell them that. And then you're going to give your conclusions and you're going to connect back to that big so what. All right, so I told you that this had relevance to this. So here's what we're finding in this particular study, which leads us to believe, and you connect it back to that big picture. All right, so you might talk about what's left to do in the research world, but you need to bring it back to that big picture idea and why it's relevant to them. I know that OUR has resources online for how you should format your posters. So for example, this is a poster template you can download from the OUR website, for example, under their resources section. And you'll see that, it maps out kind of introduction, objectives, method, data, results and conclusions. You have your references. It's very academic poster. But when you're talking to people, you go through that elevator pitch structure, all right? People generally don't want to read through every section and hear you go through all of the details. They want to know, what's the cool thing you're doing and why is this relevant for me? What's one result or fact that you found that's interesting? And then what's my take-home conclusion, right? They just want the highlights here. So think about how you would verbally explain that. If you're giving a 12-minute talk, that's probably about 10 slides. So I have some points up here for how you might structure what those slides are, for example, including you're going to have a title slide where you're introducing who you are. Again, always state the basics, always be explicit. Tell the people your name. People forget these things. And that's where you can really kind of talk in the beginning as you're on your title slide. You can set up, what is that so what? Why does this matter to you? So you can see the title of my talk. I'm so-and-so. This is the major that I'm studying here at UNC Charlotte, my area of research. Why does this matter? Set up a problem that is relevant to the real world or relevant to your audience. Connect into their values there. You can talk here on that title slide and make that point. Then you can get into your introduction, and then you can get into that background that people love, your methods, your results. Maybe that's 3 slides. And then go back to those conclusions in the big picture. So this kind of breaks it down for you in terms of like how many slides per area of topic you might be on. You want to practice this. You want to time yourself, see where you are in that kind of estimated 12-minute talk. These are good practices for everybody. Writing it out makes a huge difference. Even if you're giving your talks live and in person, a good way to practice is to even take, either Zoom or like on your phone, set up a video, record yourself, because when you see that little red light go on a camera and you just have to talk to camera, it's a really good simulation for talking to a live audience. We can't stop, pause, retake. It's just a live take. So if you can practice a live take in giving your talk, you'll be better prepared to be up on a stage.
And if I could just interrupt, even if you're an extrovert like me and you like to talk, writing things out controls that, right? Yeah.
Thank you. Public speaking tips for everybody. When you are speaking in public, even if you're an extrovert like Patrick, people get nerves. People get that little adrenaline rush, right? Going up on talking in front of people, it gets you a little, it gets you a little anxious, it gets you a little jittery. And for some people, they might be really nervous about speaking in front of others. That's very common. So a really good tip is to, number one, slow down. Think really consciously about speaking slowly, because adrenaline tends to speed up our speech. So we sound like chipmunks. We're going to race through what we have to say because we're really nervous. We're just kind of. If you think I have to talk slow, I promise to the audience's ear, it will just sound normal, like everyday normal speech. But you got to force yourself into that to combat that adrenaline rush that you're having. Another good tip is to extra practice, over practice your introduction. So if you go through the whole thing 4 times, go through your introduction 10 times. If you can get that first couple of slides and that transition into your methods section down really pat, that will help you when you're getting started and you're combating those nerves up on stage. Over practice that introduction. You can also over practice any tricky transitions you have at points to get that point really smooth. So I love to give you guys some resources to help you hone your messages. So in our last 15 minutes here, I want to communicate some messages and have you have a chance to work with a few of them. Compass Science is an organization out of Michigan State, I believe, that helps scientists in particular, but researchers kind of broadly communicate their work to lay audiences, to non-expert audiences. They have some fantastic resources on their website. I encourage you to take a look at that. One that I will introduce you to here is this idea of a message box. This is a tool that they've developed that's a brainstorming resource for people when they're giving any type of presentation or talking about their research, and in really any kind of context, you can adapt it. You can see they've constructed it so it looks like an actual box here. And you can kind of start anywhere in it. And you can answer these questions. And as you answer these questions, it helps you think about what's important about my research. Why do people care about it? How should I frame this? How do I introduce this concept to people in a way that will be impactful? And so I find it really useful if I'm thinking about a new topic, for example, I might walk myself through this exercise. You notice that they have identify the audience up there. You always want to think about who your audience is. I'll go to the middle here first, issue. This is kind of broadly what you're working on. If you were Googling your topic, what would be the keywords you would put into Google to find more information on your topic? So that relates to that, be explicit, say the basics first. What's the big picture issue that you're working on? Then I'll go up to the top here, the problem. In a research context, we're talking about the specific issue that you're working on, the specific dimension of an issue that you're working on. So this might be your research question, for example. Your research question is nested within a larger discipline, right? Within a larger field of research that asks many questions and comes up with ideas based on the answers to all those many questions. So what's your specific research question, or what hypothesis or idea are you testing? And now we've related that to that big context. The solution is, how do you address then that problem? So for you guys, that might be your research methods. What was the way you conducted the study in order to answer your research question? Then if we look at the sides, we have the benefits and the so what. So this is really important for getting at that, why do people care about your work part? The benefits, I think about this in terms of sort of society at large. So who does my research help and how? What are the short-term benefits of this type of work? What are the long-term benefits? Anyone doing health research, those are easy ways to kind of grab statistics about how many people are affected by this particular disease, for example. So if we could find better treatments for this type of disease, what are the long-term benefits in terms of public health? And then on the opposite side of this, on the right side here, you have that so what. This is where I think about how you personalize those benefits to a particular person. What do they value? How does it impact them? What do they care about? Connecting in with people very personally. So think about this. Put in the chat here with me. What are some ways that your research might benefit people in general, benefit society, or a so what here? What's something that your audience values that your work speaks to, that your work can be applied to or related to? So what's a benefit or a so what of your research? Put that into the chat for me. As you're doing that, I'll say that I often walk myself through this exercise whenever I'm giving a talk for the first time on a new project. I'll think about these questions, and that might help me decide how I want to introduce something. You can maybe think of a story, for example, that illustrates what a common problem is and relates it to in a way that people can understand and then relate to. And then they're hooked and they want to know what your research has to say about this issue that they care about that has significance for their life. All right, so Ethan, I'm going to use you as an example. You have this idea about prediction of future data, and you've had, I think, worked on neural networks and machine learning and that kind of deep learning areas. If you can think about a specific example, for example, a business case or case relevant to student life, about when and where somebody might want to make predictions about the future, and explain your research in the context of, I'm helping figuring out algorithms and analytically, how do we more accurately make predictions about the future based on data that we have. You can think of a specific example to apply your research in. That would help people understand, like, this isn't just an academic exercise, but might also like be something that adds value in a business way or adds value in my life, for example. Get some of the other examples. Claire has this idea about antibiotic methods and superbugs. So Claire, again, you can think about a story there about somebody who goes into the hospital and is exposed to superbugs. How common is that? How much do we need to worry about antibiotic resistance? If I'm making decisions for my kids and they have strep throat and they need antibiotics and they're on antibiotics for a long time, do I need to think about how much I'm asking for this and how important it is to use antibiotics all the time to treat every little thing? Or do we need to be more cautious about that? What happens if somebody gets a superbug? What are the consequences to them? So these kinds of details, they might not be directly pertinent to your research study, but they're pertinent to your audience in terms of thinking about, how do I make medical decisions as a person who's not a doctor and has to make medical decisions for myself and people I care about? How do I think about this issue of antibiotics and superbugs and make decisions? If you relate into that, they might now, oh, okay, so I'm now really interested in what you've got to say on this topic, and you've hooked my interest in. One more tool that's one that's really fun for you here. So I'm going to put this one into the chat for you. And Claire has a question here. Claire says, when is it appropriate to add examples that are personal? Personal is great. So it's really just whatever you're comfortable sharing. And you can modify the story to fit your needs there. So it doesn't have to have every accurate detail. You can make it frame your picture. So if you want to talk about your dad's experience, and that maybe led you into this kind of research, people love those kinds of stories because it shows why you care about it, why you're passionate about it. They'll connect in with that passion. But if you can provide some other statistics, like it's not just happened to my dad, but actually this happens to this many number of people every year, then people are like, oh, hey, that might happen to me too. Now I'm, extra interested in hearing what happened here. So whatever you're comfortable with. That link, sorry, why did that not? Picture. So we're going to go to this website. This is called the Upgoer 5 text editor. And it's a challenge for explaining your research in simple terms. Simple is really hard. And what it asks you to do is to explain a hard concept in common everyday English words. Like, in fact, the 1,000 most used words in the English language. I think that I typed that link in right. So I want you to actually open up a web browser on your end and go to that link and try putting in some of your research concepts and ideas. And as you do, it'll start red underlining, flagging words when they're too complicated, when they're not part of the 1,000 most common used words in the English language. It's a really hard exercise. So I want you to start putting some text into this Upgoer 5 engine here. And tell me here in the chat some words that you're using that are getting flagged. Ooh, Catherine, fish is getting flagged for you. Ooh. So I'm putting up on the screen as you're adding this information into the chat for me here. A sentence from one of my actual publications. I do work on cognition and memory and attention and distraction and these kinds of things. So this top sentence in black is an actual sentence that I put into an academic publication. And when I tried to put this in the Upgoer 5 engine, of course, it flagged a lot of these words. And so I had to think about not just coming up with synonyms for the words that I want to say, another word to say irrelevant, for example, but really a totally different way to communicate this same idea, different words to communicate my idea. So instead of top sentence, what got past the Upgoer 5 was your past matters for what you now pay attention to and for what you ignore. And all of these words are part of the 1,000 most common words in the English language. So if you've gotten anything, a sentence about your research past the Upgoer 5, put in your successful examples here, or put in what you tried and then put in what you successfully got past. So I've tried this, it flagged these words, and instead of trying this other thing. Catherine, for fish, I don't know. It might have to be animals of the sea. That might get past it. Put some bit in the chat for me about what did not work, what did work. And I'd also like to know what tip from today surprised you. So if you can put that in the chat as well for me, I'd appreciate that. And as you're doing that, I'll tell you that sometimes we don't want to oversimplify it. Like Catherine, you should be able to say fish in your talk. People understand fish, that's fine. But the Upgoer 5 really pushes you to think, how simple can I make the words that I'm using to communicate my ideas? And sometimes you need to go a little more complex than that. I think people can understand fish and bone, and that would be just fine. Catherine, for your talks about this. But you could talk about things as in fish and bone and everyday words and not use fancy jargon and descriptors for those. So oversimplification may not be great. We don't want to be so oversimplified that we're inaccurate about describing our research, but we do want to be simple enough that anyone, any kind of background can understand what we're saying. So Catherine says she got through, I study what fish eat and what kind of place they live in. I understand that. That sounds great to me. So you can build from there. Put in the chat for me what tip from today most surprised you. I had a great pleasure talking with you all today. It's always wonderful to be with this particular group. I wish you the really best of luck.
Thank you. These are the kids that
um,
are going to save the world.
Yes, I'm excited. I want to go to your
One
conference.
fish at a time.
Oh, one fish at a time.
Well, thank you very much for this. And everybody give her the digital hands or the thank yous. And we appreciate when we have professionals like this come in and talk with you guys. So thanks again. And just a reminder for students, next week is spring break. You guys get a break. We don't get a break, but you get a break. And that's the most important thing. So use it wisely and get yourself caught up if you need to, and take a little mental wellness if you guys need it as well. All right, everybody. Happy Wednesday. It's almost Friday. Bye, guys. Bye, Elise.